At long last, it is time to talk some DFS once again. The week one main slate has been up for about a month now, and we finally got games on the horizon. We're going to break down our favorite options across week one for NFL DFS on FanDuel, let you know some key strategies to consider, and hopefully just get you set to win some cash in the opening week of the 2022 NFL season. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the senior managing editor of numberFire.com. Brandon, it is week number one. How we doing, baby?
Oh, man, you got you got the week one energy. I was going to say you're in like mid-season form.
I got an espresso machine yesterday, Brandon. I got
energy you did?
For days.
Oh, you did not tell me this.
Yeah, I know, because you judge my coffee taste, which I don't drink Folgers anymore, for the record.
Okay.
Yeah, I
so
know.
You didn't buy an espresso machine and use Folgers in it. No, I mean, no offense to Folgers, but if
you want to sponsor the podcast, Folgers will take your cash, but also I'm not drinking your coffee anymore. So
it's countercyclical to buy an espresso machine and then not invest in proper coffee.
I became a fancy boy this summer. I went
You're wearing
to
hats, you're drinking espresso.
I went to Europe twice actually, and so now I've become a fancy boy who drinks espresso. And so I have JJ, our old boss, on the covering the spread to talk player props this afternoon. My words per minute is going to be astronomical. Based on how fast I talk, way too fast to begin with. I'm aware of this. I try to talk slower, but by 3 p.m., gonna be nuts. I won't be able to say syllables. It's gonna be unhinged, and I'm excited for it.
Well, I think that's why we work well together. I talk very slowly, and you talk very quickly. So I think averaged out, we're pretty set.
Also, the reason we work well together is because we fully agree on everything. As One-Eyed Jack Productions remind us on YouTube, let's win some money on Debo again this year. One-Eyed Jack, yes. As mentioned, we are live on the FanDuel YouTube page. We'll be here every Monday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern, breaking down, doing a recap podcast Monday, preview podcast Thursday, live on the FanDuel YouTube page and up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that. So same schedule as we had all of last year. Excited to break things down with you, Brandon. If you are a new listener here to the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, the way things go, we'll go through a slate overview, let you know kind of the key things to know for this week. We'll talk about some injuries impacting this slate. We're going to go through bookmaker info, talk about some game stacks and stuff like that. Also, a trends section, which this week will largely be focused on overall DFS process. Because I know a lot of you may be playing DFS for the first time, so we want to kind of give you the tools you need to fill out a good lineup. We'll talk about some weather, and we'll go through our positional plays at the end of the podcast. So giving you the tools to hopefully make good picks early on, and we will talk about guys we like at the end of the podcast. But the overall thought process is we want to discuss process in the podcast so that you don't need us. We want to make ourselves irrelevant. That's kind of the goal here. We want to make it where by week 10, you can listen to us if you want, but we want you to kind of know the keys to a good lineup all by your own. We're going to break down those key things to discuss in just 1 second. But first, college football fans, the 2022 season is officially underway in FanDuel, and DiGiorno are joining forces to make your college football Saturdays that much more exciting. Introducing the Saturday Slice Challenge presented by DiGiorno, a free-to-play daily fantasy contest centered around Saturday's biggest college football games. The contest is simple. All you have to do is build your best 7-player roster while staying under the salary cap, then follow along as the games unfold with FanDuel's live scoring feature. If at the end of the games, your lineup finds itself toward the top of the standings, you'll win a slice of $10,000 in cash prizes, courtesy of DiGiorno. The Saturday Slice Challenge locks on Saturday at noon Eastern. So go to FanDuel.com/league/DiGiorno-CFB and enter your line today. That's FanDuel.com/league/DiGiorno-CFB. Also, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. We have this NFL podcast twice per week. We have NASCAR, UFC, Daily Fantasy Baseball, PGA just around the corner, all in the same feed. So search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe and get all these as they are posted. Also, all of our betting stuff is on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. Our week 2 college football preview is up with Ed Fang and Drew Martin. I talked to Ryan Williams about 5 minutes ago about the week 1 NFL betting slate, got his favorite bets for there. And also, like I said, we'll talk to JJ Zacharyson for the prop betting discussion later on today. Let's dive in now, though, and talk about week number 1. Let's start things off here with our slate overview. And Brandon, again, just kind of the key headline for you heading into week number 1. So when you look at the main slate on FanDuel for this week, what is the key thing you're keeping in mind for week 1?
Don't count up that bankroll before the afternoon games. The 4:00 games on the East Coast, those are largely the best games of the week, with Kansas City, Arizona. I'm still not used to Las Vegas. They're playing the Chargers, Green Bay, Minnesota, and then potentially like sneaky, at least one big ceiling with Tennessee and the Giants there. Never think a slate's over.
There are two.
Two? Oh, yeah. Saquon. Yeah. But never think that the slate is over. If Derrick Henry's game is not complete. I've learned that the hard way in the past. But more specifically, we want to stack up the best games, and there are very clearly 4 games that stand out above the rest, and 3 of those are coming in late in the day.
Yeah, so I think if we're listing out the quarterbacks I'd want to use, there are like 4, and 3 of them are in the 4 p.m. games. Like that's kind of goes back to what you're saying, where you kind of want to be measured. I also think it makes late swap pretty active for this week because you're probably going to have a lot of guys left in that time frame. So getting read on where you're at, deciding, do I need to get contrarian? Should I potentially be a bit more chalky? Things like that heading into those 4:25 p.m. Eastern games. So Brandon's talking about being wary of that. I want to make sure that, and this is a thing we'll talk about a lot, but my key thing is don't get too drawn in by value at the expense of raw points. There are guys who are objectively undersalaried on this week 1 slate due to role changes, injuries, stuff like that. But do they have upside? And we'll talk about this a lot throughout the year, but you need raw points. So we'll hear a lot about, 2.5x or 3x value. What that means is you're getting 2.5 FanDuel points for every $1,000 worth of FanDuel salary. So let's say a guy is hypothetically at $6,000 on FanDuel. His salary is $6,000. 2.5x, who I put myself in a pickle, 15 points.
I thought you'd go 10,000.
I know that would have been a lot easier. But like if they get you 2.5x, that's 15 points. That's fine, but you need a lot of juice to take down a tournament. So value is good. You want guys who are undersalaried, but make sure they have a path to a ceiling. I want every single player in my roster to have a chance to give me 20 FanDuel points, whether they are a value running back, a value receiver, value tight end. I mean, not value tight end, but like value other spots. I want a path to 20. Otherwise, they're probably not viable. So that's going to be a key thing for me in terms of talking about some of the guys who may pop in terms of like value projections this week, but keeping in mind that we do need raw points at a certain point as well. And some of those value plays may come from injuries. So let's dive in to the injury section for week number 1. Unfortunately, it's still kind of lengthy despite it being week 1. It begins with kind of a surprise one. George Kittle got hurt during Monday's practice. He missed Wednesday's practice with a groin issue. He's day to day. Kittle is not healthy. We can say that for sure. How does this impact your view of the 49ers passing offense in a matchup with a pretty poor Chicago Bears defense?
Yeah, so it definitely doesn't help. The total is 40.5 in that game, one of the lowest of the week. That matters whenever we have games that are projected to score, if you just look at the total at FanDuel Sportsbook, 10 plus more points than this game, that adds up. Even if things are concentrated, of course, if things are concentrated, it does help a little bit for us to buy into lower totals. But definitely dings this game. I think you mentioned the 4 quarterbacks. We'll talk about them. One guy who's in the consideration set for, I think, both of us, but maybe just misses out is Trey Lance.
Yeah.
The salary of $7,500, really good. Saw a lot of rushing from him whenever he did play full games last year. But you take out George Kittle. I don't know if it affects him as much because of the rushing as it would other quarterbacks. But I really think that this game's still a little bit in play for mini stacks. And by a mini stack, I mean maybe like a Darnell Mooney plus a Brandon Ayuk as like a value kind of stack and say, hey, if this game does kind of be decent, it's probably going to flow through Darnell Mooney on the Bears side. But then Ayuk, maybe Deebo Samuel, whose salary I know is much higher than Brandon Ayuk's. But it lowers me. This game's not that appealing anyway, but I don't think it's a complete write-off like some other games might be this week.
Yeah, I think that Lance is at least in the discussion, is what I would say. And I said there are 4 quarterbacks. He's probably pretty firmly number 5, I would say. So he's there. Having Kittle be out would be a downgrade for him. I would say, though, that Brandon Ayuk is good in a vacuum at $5,600 on FanDuel. He'd be really good if there are no Kittle. I will say, though, that if you're looking at situations in which popular wide receivers wind up flopping or falling short of expectations, low total games are situations where they fall short almost every time. So keep that in mind. It is a low total game, but just from like a volume perspective, you could probably grade out pretty well if Kittle were not go, but it would downgrade Lance from me. Allen Lazard missed practice Wednesday after getting stepped on in practice last week. He has an ankle injury. That puts his status up in the air. Robert Tonyan and David Bakhtiari both limited during practice Wednesday. So the Packers facing the Vikings, it's a poopy game in terms of pace, but it's a pretty fun game from an offensive perspective, and there's fun players within it. So how does your view of this Packers offense change if Lazard cannot go?
Yeah, classic Packers one, just playing slowly, but being appealing to some degree. I think the best play on their side is Aaron Jones, and historically I've not been huge on Aaron Jones, but I think that based on indications from like what Aaron Rodgers has said, they're going to lean on Aaron Jones, but not only Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon out of the backfield. He said, we need to get our 11 best guys on the field. Sounds like to him that includes both running backs. Usually when we have 2 running backs, we don't have a running back for DFS, but this has kind of been Aaron Jones' situation for a long time. I think if the running back slate was worse, I would actually be a little bit intrigued by A.J. Dillon, but I don't know if I'm quite there myself. Because we have a lot of running backs that we'll go over, especially at the top of the salary pool. But I'd say Aaron Jones is number 1. And I know Devontae Adams is vacating 32% target share. MBS is gone. But if you remove Lazard, this kind of feels like it's going to be a Colts kind of offense where you're surprised if anyone really sustainably cracks like a 20% target share. And I don't think that that's enough for me in week 1 to want to go there.
I think that Sammy Watkins would be at least mildly intriguing at $5,500. Randall Cobb maybe at 51, but I think the upside question is biggest with him. Typically, to make a perfect lineup at wide receiver on FanDuel, you need 85 yards or 2 touchdowns, and I'm not sure Cobb could really get to either, which is why I agree with you where Jones is the best piece in this game. They had one game last year with no Devontae and no Lazard. That was a COVID game against the Cardinals, and in that game, Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon had 16 carries, so he was involved. But Aaron Jones had 15 carries and 11 targets in that game. And I want as many targets on my roster as I can possibly get. Aaron Jones gets me that for 74. So I agree with you where he's had his flaws. But with the role I think he'll have in this offense, I am very, very intrigued by him at $7,400. Zach Ertz able to get in a limited session on Wednesday, increasing the odds. He's able to go against the Chiefs. Rondale Moore was not on the injury report, so he's good to go. We'll talk about that game in the Bookmaker section. J.K. Dobbins has a shot to play week 1, but is far from a lock. Dobbins got in a limited practice Wednesday, but John Harbaugh wouldn't commit to him playing. Lamar said, we hope he's back in a couple weeks. So I'm guessing Dobbins probably won't go, likely leaving it to Mike Davis and Kenyon Drake. It's against the Jets, Brandon. We should like that situation, but you got anything here on these 2 backs?
No, this is not really the backfield either where you're going to see a ceiling game. This backfield notoriously under Harbaugh does not give specific running backs high snap rates. Nobody got over 67% last year. Dobbins could be that guy fully healthy, but I think that it's just a pretty easy avoid for me, and I'm not tempted even a little bit.
It's not even just like the snaps. It's also they don't give them targets, and I want to monopolize targets. I want as many as I can possibly get, and I'm probably not going to get that here. So Davis's salary is very low. It is $5,600, but I think he's in the value discussion. Like, oh, it'll probably be a value, but Is it enough to actually move the needle? Probably not. The Jets on the opposing side, one is Zach Wilson for week 1, Joe Flacco. It's a wacko for Flacco revenge game, Brandon. I know you're excited for that. Any Jets for you against the Ravens here on Sunday?
So it sounds like Breece Hall and Michael Carter are going to split work early on, with maybe even a favorable role for Michael Carter, which is bad for a lot of my season-long teams. That'll probably be the last time I talk about my season-long teams all season, so don't worry. But I think maybe Elijah Moore at 6,000 has some appeal. And I was talking to you before the show. I think that in this game, like, Lamar is appealing as a bit of a. We're not going to get any quarterback be substantially popular. We almost never do. But I think like Lamar plus Mark Andrews plus Moore could be a really interesting week 1 stack, because you're getting a bit different, but you're not being stupid, which is usually how you like to phrase that.
Yeah, be different without being stupid is kind of like my go-to in terms of deciding how to view things. My question is, will they actually be pivots? Because we love game stacks. We love those kinds of situations, but people love attacking the Jets. And so I feel like we're probably going to see a lot of eyeballs gravitate towards Lamar. Looking at the fan share tags right now, they don't have a ton logged yet for week 1, but Lamar's up there, number 2 quarterback behind Jalen Hurts. So
doesn't matter.
What?
Quarterback.
Oh, sorry. We'll talk about that later. You're right. Good tease. Well, sorry, Brandon. Good tease.
But we've been saying that at least for last year. We really touched on that a lot. I don't feel like I need to pivot away from quarterbacks. I think though, if you look at tight end specifically, we have Travis Kelce in a great game at 8,000, Mark Andrews at 7,900 in a much worse game. I know the matchup looks good, but then we have Darren Waller at 7,000. Kyle Pitts is only 6,000. I don't think Mark Andrews is going to be substantially popular. And really week 1, we don't see a ton of complete chalk, but again, it's going to be different enough, especially if you pair that with a jet to run it back.
Yeah.
The combination of that is going to be pretty unique.
I think the overlooked stud tight end is in a different game we'll talk about later on. You mentioned him, but I don't think he'll be very popular this week.
Darren Waller?
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy. Yep. Gonna happen. Gonna be good. Michael Thomas is a hamstring injury. Got in a limited practice on Wednesday. Saints are in a decent spot against the Falcons. How are you viewing them here under the assumption that Thomas is good to go, which might be a bad assumption based on the past couple of years?
Yeah. I was kind of thinking he'd be an interesting week 1 play, but they're at what, a 24-point implied team total. That's pretty hefty for this slate. I think Chris Olave 5,000 is appealing, especially if Thomas is not a full go. But I think the most appealing play here, similar to the Packers, is just going to be the running back, Alvin Kamara. His workload, I'll touch on in one of my trends, pretty phenomenal. I think the offense is going to be better this year for him. Inject a great workload into even a good offense for an elite player. That's very appealing. So probably not super in on this game overall, but maybe I'm too low on it. What are your thoughts?
I'm not super in on it either. So if you're too low on it, then so am I. Just again, I want games at super high totals. This one is not going to check that box at 42.5. I don't expect the Falcons offense to be very good against a very, very good Saints defense. So to me, I'm okay being a bit lower on this one, at least for now. Deontay Johnson has a shoulder injury. He did not commit to playing on Sunday. It sounds like he probably will, but didn't commit to it. They face the Bengals this week. Mitchell Trubisky starting here for the Steelers. What's your view of this passing offense with Deontay being banged up?
A lot of value if you want value, and I know we're not taking value just for the sake of value, but Chase Claypool, George Pickens, these guys should have some upside with their athleticism and their ability, in theory, to score touchdowns if Pittsburgh's scoring touchdowns. Pat Freiermuth, 5,300, should have a pretty solid role. Especially if there's no Deontay Johnson, there'd be a lot of overlap there with kind of targets they'd probably try to get him. So I think that this is one of the more appealing value offenses, especially if you want to stack up the Bengals. We're not going to talk about this game specifically about, in terms of being a good stack, but anytime you can play Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase plus T. Higgins, and or Joe Mixon, like you have to be into that, and you can bring it back in ways that aren't really that silly. And I think that could be, this could end up being one of those games that I'm assuming this is a 1:00 game at like 2:30, maybe halftime. It's like, oh, this was a pretty obvious stack to sort of pick up on, but maybe it's kind of overlooked.
Yeah, a Burrow's $7,700. Higgins is $7,000. Chase is 82. But like if you did a Burrow, Higgins, George Pickens bring back, pretty fun. I'm not opposed to that because I agree with you. We're like, okay, we're getting a hyper logical team. We're being different without being dumb. We know where the ball is going, at least on the Bengals side of things. I'm not opposed.
Well, it can really only go so many places for the Steelers. So
yeah,
but
it can't go left with Mitch Trubisky. So it's going in the dirt or going right. You choose.
But for Pittsburgh specifically, like the value plays are. I mean, we saw Chase Claypool. That 1 week you played him a couple years ago. He's
four touchdowns.
4 touchdowns. Like George Pickens.
Yeah.
Like Pickens is a very good athlete. Like these guys can put up 17, 18 FanDuel points. Their ceiling isn't like 12 FanDuel points.
Yes, I think that's correct. Sterling Shepard logged a limited practice on Wednesday. He said he'll play this week coming off a torn Achilles. Any interest in the Giants passing offense against the Titans?
The Giants always feel, and I know I'll limit like my personal like dynasty team and like season long team stuff, but the Giants
always dynasty with the Giants because I have a lot of Darius Slayton stuff that is bad. It's dead. It's so dead.
Like they're like a bad dynasty roster for me. I'm like, oh no, these guys like they got it. Like Wandale, Tony, like these guys like they're good football players, but you put that in a DFS perspective and you don't really know who's going to get a high market share, especially in week 1. I kind of want to take a wait and see approach. But again, these guys should have some upside. I think specifically Kadarius Toney at 5,300 is appealing.
Yes.
Because you can pair him with Derrick Henry, who could be really chalky, but also might be kind of overlooked because the game's not as appealing as some of the other games that the stud running backs are in. Derrick Henry was phenomenal when he was healthy last year, kind of slipped in redraft this year, which does have some overlap, I think, especially with like week 1 sentiment and how we view things. Henry's salary's up there. I think a Henry plus Toney balances things out. I think that's a really, really easy, mini stack there. I'm not going to play the quarterbacks, but if I want Derrick Henry, I at least probably want to bring it back a little bit. And I think Toney is the number 1 place I'm looking.
Well, think about the reason Toney's salary is 53. It's 53 because there's a heavy tie between ADP and average draft position in season long and FanDuel salaries. Probably not a coincidence, but like he was pushed down because of injuries, but he was not on the injury report on Wednesday. He got a full practice and it wasn't even logged as being injured. Like if we get a healthy Kadarius Toney for $5,300, given the targets per route run data for him last year, the yards per route run, I think we'd be insane to pass him up, honestly. And I don't think he'll be popular. I don't think so. So I agree with you. A Henry plus Toney stack, very attractive in week 1. And I will have that at some point. I definitely think that is a worthwhile look for this week. Shepard, no. Wandale, I loved him. Like when he was with Nebraska, getting some rushing attempts, stuff like that. I hope he gets that with the Giants too. A little Debo in him. I'm not sure the ADOT will be high enough to justify rostering yet, but Toney, I know things are good. And what?
I know. The
Debo thing.
I feel like there's been a lower ADOT sort of player who got some rushes who you loved for a long time.
But Debo's got that dog in him. Wandale probably does too, but we know that Debo does. James Robinson appears poised to return this week coming off his torn Achilles. Didn't play in the preseason, and there Travis Etienne absolutely dominated snaps of the first team offense. So any interest in Etienne in this game for the Jaguars against the Washington Commanders?
One of the ugliest games, one of the least appealing games of the week. I do, spoiler alert, my love on defense is Washington. But I think for the expected role for Etienne with the targets being what they are, spoiler alert, we love targets here, even on FanDuel, half PPR site.
We'll talk about that in the trend section. Yep.
Well, I think we'll probably talk about it 2 or 3 times, honestly, in the trend section. But I think that he's appealing. I think Christian Kirk's appealing. The problem is I don't know if I really want to run it back very much. I actually don't, to be completely honest, I don't know what Antonio Gibson's salary is.
I don't care.
I don't particularly care. 68, that's
goodness.
That's higher. That's higher, way higher than I anticipated.
Whew. Those are early August salaries, buddy.
But yeah, I mean, ETN at 62 with the potential. I mean, there's really no ceiling for what his targets could be. He could just basically be DeAndre Swift. So I think he's got a lot of appeal for a path to upside in spite of his offense.
I agree. I think ETN is the only guy I want to use here. Kirk, I get it. I think that your thought process is good. There are a lot of guys in more attractive games in that range I like. Maybe that means that Kirk will just be a super low rostered, but I think I'd rather go with the guys in the potential shootout games. I don't care as much about game environment at running back as I do at receiver. I care about it, but I don't care as much. So ETN to me, given the type of role I expect him to have, even with James Robinson healthy, I think is very good. Gibson, I expect to lose high leverage work to J.D. McKissick. He might lose some he could find a way to lose goal line work too. So no interest there. But ETN, I think, is interesting for sure. At 62, not a lot of low salaried backs I like this week, but ETN is one of them. Let's dive in now to what the bookmakers are saying about this week. And one thing I want to flag before we dive into this is the reason we discuss bookmaker info is because bookmakers are smart. People who bet on NFL games have a lot of money on the line and therefore are smart as well. And the signals they give us are important. We want to target high scoring games, preferably with tight totals as well, to get that back and forth potential shootout. So we're going to talk about basically games we want to stack in the bookmaker section. Now, when I say I want to stack this game, that does not mean I want as many guys in this game as possible. I want to have smart exposure to this game, probably 2 to 3 guys on one side, 1 to 2 on the other side, keeping it like that. We're not saying just use every single guy from this game. Stacking is when you pair guys in the same team or from the same game together. A game stack is same game. A straight up stack is on the same team. So that's the preface for everything we're going to run into here. Let's dive in to the bookmaker info, starting off with the highest total on the board. That is the Chiefs at the Cardinals. Total there 53.5. Spread is 5.5 up from 3.5 earlier on this week, much to my dismay, as I may or may not have the Cardinals money line. Whoops. Mistakes have been made, Brandon, that's for sure. A lot of old faces and new places in this game. We got Marquise Brown. We've got Marquez Valdez-Scantling. We got Juju Smith-Schuster. It's a lot. How confident are you in those new guys, in their new roles, in what could be the slate's best game?
Yeah, that's a tough one. This is the kind of question that doesn't have a specific answer. We can want it to have an answer. We can feel like it has an answer, but we don't quite know. That is a problem. I think it's a lot easier on Arizona's side, honestly, to figure out market shares. And number one with Marquise Brown. He's a guy I love a lot this week. But for the Chiefs, I'm kind of into a lot of options. I think I'd have to lean Marquez Valdez-Scantling specifically for the salary. And if we can project that teams in the past have used guys in ways that are optimal, then the guy with the higher ADOT and the path to much more air yards, which, yes, air yards do matter. They're pretty predictive. Yards alone are great, but doesn't necessarily help us find buy low or sell high windows. So I would go Marquez Valdez-Scantling, number one. Among the receivers, of course, I think it's a given that Travis Kelce is like the first place I'd look for a pass catching option.
Yeah.
It seems like based on the reaction Jim is making is that he loves Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So I'll let you extrapolate on that, but I also want to make sure that we touch on Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, so we're retiring the MVS nickname. He's no longer MVS. He is MVP. That's just how it's going to go for MVS this year.
You just called him MVS.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. We're retired MVP. Marquez Valdez player. I don't know. We'll figure this out. We'll workshop it. We'll get the interns who don't exist to work on this and decide how we want to play things here. But I think $5,500. We talked a lot about, things you want to look for in value wide receivers. And for me, that checklist is finding guys who get downfield targets, because that has been a situation that's been conducive to upside in the past for lower salary players. Guys who get downfield targets in efficient offenses. Not a lot of offense is more efficient than that of Patrick Mahomes. So you're plugging Marquez Valdez-Scantling into this. They're facing the Arizona Cardinals. And the Cardinals, we saw last year that the Chiefs faced a lot of like too high secondaries, where they'd have two safeties lined up, and that forced the Chiefs to kind of audible and run, a lot more of a dink and dunk kind of offense and feast based on yards after the catch. The Cardinals didn't run that as much as other teams did. So to me, that says we have more leeway to potentially go with a guy like MVS and feel pretty good about him. Of course, I do like Juju Smith-Schuster too. I think that, one thing that I do, we've talked about this plenty on the show previously, but for the new listeners, one thing that I do is when I'm multi-entry for tournaments is I'll fill out a skeleton of combinations. So for one lineup, I'll go Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, run it back with Marquise Brown. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, run it back with James Conner, stuff like that. I think that I want to make sure I'm getting all these guys in there, but Marquez Valdez-Scantling, if I have like one lineup, he's probably going to be the way I get exposure to this game because of the role he could potentially have in this offense and because of the matchup with a Cardinals team that doesn't run as much too high as others may. Now, you mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I've thought a lot about him, an unhealthy amount, for the past month, because you could tell right away this game is going to be among the best games on the slate because the high total, previously tight spread, again, boo-hoo me. Those situations are the ones we want to stack with. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had gallbladder surgery last offseason and kind of mixed reviews during the preseason this year in terms of his usage with the first team offense. In one of the games, he played the first 7 consecutive plays back in preseason week 1. In the next game he played, he did rotate out a bit more, but still had a decent role. He's $5,800. I think this team is going to be better equipped to run the ball than they were in past years because MVS and Juju are both, MVP and Juju are both very good blockers. We could see some more Noah Gray and Jody Fortson out there to, enable the rushing offense of the Chiefs. It's another way to counter that too high approach they see on the opposing side. I'm still very nervous about him. I think I'll still wind up being on CEH, but I wish we had gotten a more firm answer on him in the preseason about what kind of role he's going to have this year.
Yeah, this feels like a little bit of a trap where we want the role to be better than it is. It's very easy to anticipate or tell yourself that a role is better than it is. It's a lot harder to be more objective and, be okay missing out if, CEH goes out, plays 75% of the snaps, is just kind of treated as a more of a feature back in a great game. I think that the best route is I'll play CEH when I have other pieces in this game, when I'm trying to stack it up more. But I'm not going to play CEH as a one-off, not really like a cash game consideration, even at that salary.
That's not a cash game consideration. Absolutely not there. I will probably have him as a one-off. Like if I'm going with like a Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, Darren Waller thing where I need to save some salary, I think I could see CEH as a one-off there. But I also like the running back on the opposing side of this game, James Conner. Last year, when there was no Chase Edmonds, Conner's role was amazing. 5-game sample, 17 carries, 5.2 targets per game, 114.4 yards from scrimmage per game. That's a sick role. Conner's salary is not low by any means, but 77 isn't bad either. So what's your read on James Conner? And then talk about the Cardinals offense too within that.
Yeah, it's definitely appealing. I don't think it's necessarily more appealing than some other options around him. That could be, maybe I'm just blinded by the DeAndre Swift hype, but I know what DeAndre Swift's role can be whenever he's not going to get scripted out of this game, even if right. They're trailing. And I love this game a lot. I might even maybe prefer Aaron Jones a smidge over James Conner. And if that's the case, that is putting him in the territory of I can't play everyone.
Yeah.
It'll, we're going to talk about a lot of people, so that we touch on a lot of the key plays this week, but I don't necessarily know if I'm there but I do prefer him to like Nick Chubb
Sure.
at 78. So where are you with Connor? How high up on the list is he for you?
You might have said this. Will he be in game stacks for you?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, cool. So I think that's probably where I'm at too then, where he's a fixture within game stacks, but then not someone to actively seek out due to Saquon, due to Aaron Jones, maybe Swift as well. I think that I agree with you there. So I think we're on the same page as James Conner. The guy I like a lot, though, is Kyler Murray. If you look at, and we'll talk about this a bit in the trend section, but if you look at the biggest inefficiency in terms of where the public invests based on FanDuel Sunday Million roster rates and what pops for perfect lineups, it is underdog quarterbacks. I'm not saying like, oh, 10-point dog, they're going to throw it a lot. Herpy derpy derp, you should go towards them. I'm saying like tight underdogs, competitive games. The spread should not be 5.5 in this game, but I think that adds up well for Kyler. So Kyler likely to be not super popular because of, stuff that's going on this offseason, because the fact they are underdogs in this game. He's not the most attractive quarterback in this game. I think Kyler will be under rostered. So I was talking about MVP being in a single.
You're like 1 for 5.
I know. MVP in a single entry lineup. I am 75% sure Kyler will be like my go-to single entry quarterback because I think he'll be less rostered than he should in a game where we could see a lot of fireworks. What are your thoughts on Kyler?
Yeah, I mean, I like Kyler Murray in a game like this. He runs the ball. We know where the ball is going, assuming. I mean, he's one of the best quarterback plays of the week. And like you said, he's probably not going to be as popular as he deserves to be.
We got a question about Rondale Moore over on YouTube from One Eye Jack Productions, asking if he would be the Debo of 2022. Probably not, I would say, in terms of being the Debo, but he's $5,500. I think that's a little bit rich, personally, in terms of salary. I'd rather go with Hollywood, rather go with James Conner in terms of guys I want to use in this team. Will you get to Rondale Moore in game stacks this week?
I think I could see myself getting there in game stacks. There, especially if Zach Ertz is. I mean, even if he plays, he's not 100%. And I'm pretty sure Rondale set like the lowest ADOT record of a receiver
by like 3 yards.
Yeah. So you would think there'd be some overlap there with the kind of targets that maybe Zach Ertz would get.
Because Zach Ertz is not allowed to run 10 yards downfield, correct? Yes.
But yeah, I think Rondale in game stacks, yes. I'm there, not necessarily in a one-off. I've been there in the past with trying to assume huge roles for guys like this, and it's really not worth it because we have more information on other teams.
Yeah. Okay. I think that is a fair assessment as well. Let's move on here to the second game on our list. That is the other total above 50. That is the Chargers and the Raiders. Total is 52.5. A tighter spread here of 3.5. But again, got a big new face here in Devontae Adams. What's your view of this game for stacking Chargers versus Raiders?
Yes.
Agreed. We move on. Is that it?
I mean, who in the realistic set is not like in consideration?
Okay. So
I guess Derek Carr.
So in terms of like prioritization, I'm going to be pretty low at Austin Eckler this week, given his salary, given Christian McCaffrey, given Derrick Henry. I love Eckler. I think that he's insanely fun. Salary's a little bit rich for me. So in terms of like relative to salary, probably not there. Probably not on Hunter Renfrow at 59 either. I think like those would be the two guys I'd single out as being plays this week.
And we're not a Josh Jacobs podcast.
No, I wasn't. Okay. He's not a real player. He wasn't.
Okay. Well, no. He's still got a pretty high, average draft position, high enough. Didn't he like start the first?
He did. That was game? A bit overblown because I think that his role is better than people are pitching it to be, but he's not going to catch passes. So no, he's a no.
So I guess there were more players we weren't really considering, but
true.
Yeah. Do you ever? I guess we both have a preference between Keenan Allen and Mike Williams this week.
Big Mike. The name Big is in his name. His God-given name, Big Mike.
I don't want to overlook Keenan Allen, but spoiler alert, it's going to be hard for me to find salary for wide receivers this week.
I do think that like the main pitch for Keenan Allen is being different without being dumb, paying up to be contrarian in that situation. I think that's the main pitch for him. That with that said, like we're talking about like single entry lineups, I would not go Keenan over Mike, even considering that, because I need to save salary. So Keenan will be in like my multi-entry combinations, but not the prime consideration over Mike Williams. The reason I like Mike Williams so much is he gets the kind of targets we like. If you look at the 15 games that Mike Williams played with Keenan Allen last year, Mike Williams had 40% of the team's deep targets and 23% in the red zone. Overall target share was up and down. It went all around. It was not fun, but I just want those deep targets. We get that for a low salary. You did a full piece on these two guys during the offseason and found that like not a huge difference between them, to be fully honest. So for $6,600, I want Big Mike in there.
Yeah, I love him this week. Like Keenan Allen, I think we're both lower on Eckler than consensus, but we love Justin Herbert this week as well.
Yeah, Herbert is in the top 4. We talked about 4 quarterbacks we like. He's one of those 4 for me for sure. Step below Mahomes, step below Kyler. I think he's on par with Jalen Hurts for me, and I like Hurts, so that's an endorsement of both those guys. But just a step below those other 2 guys.
Do you think you will play Devontae Adams without a game stack?
No.
Okay.
Do you?
I can't either. I can't. Just being realistic.
Yeah, I agree. But Darren Waller, I will. $7,000 for a guy who was not on the injury report. I think his hamstring injury might have been more contract related than anything else, which fair, get your money. So I'm not super worried about that. Not on the injury report on Wednesday. I think that's actually pretty impactful news. So if I want to, you did this full piece up on pivoting. You found that stud tight ends who are under rostered were very good plays. I think that guy this week is Darren Waller. I know it's an attractive game, which could make him more popular than I think, but you get Kelsey in that electric game. You get Andrews against the Jets. I don't think people will use Waller over those 2. So again, going with the single entry angle, I want Waller. I think he's very, very fun. I might not be able to get there because I want McCaffrey too, and that's tough to pair them together. But I want to try. I want to try to make that happen because he's really fun this week. Any final thoughts for you on this game?
No, I wanted to make sure I touched on Devontae because obviously he's going to be a good play, but realistically, we don't very often roster high salaried receivers, and we'll kind of get into why in a bit.
There's also a guy I like more in the 8,000 range at receiver named Justin freaking Jefferson, who is in that exact same range. Okay. Sneakily, one of the more fun games in the slate, both in real life and in DFS, is between the Eagles and the Lions. I love that this is a fun game. That game is in Detroit. Eagles are 3.5-point favorites. It ranks 4th for me in aggregate offensive efficiency, but behind the 2 games we discussed, and then also the Vikings versus Packers. What?
Can I just ask, what's the Jared Goff boost for you? Is he like top 12 level quarterback for you?
Most efficient quarterback in football. What do you mean? Why are you questioning this?
Actually, I love this game too, so I can't.
Let me look this up. No, let me look this up. Where do I Detroit projected to rank in passing efficiency? 20th? That might be kind of high. They're 20th. We'll see. We'll see about that. Goff's back, baby. Goff's back. MVS has been replaced as MVP. Goff, MVP. Okay. We have some low-starred pieces in this game. I'm not using Jared Goff. I want to make that fully clear. But what's your view of this game from a DFS perspective?
Love it. You kind of hit on it where we have low salary plays. I mean, Jalen Hurts at 8,000, one of my favorite quarterback plays of the week. Pretty easy to understand why with his rushing ability, but also just giving him A.J. Brown is pretty phenomenal. A.J. Brown's salary of $7,100, not nearly high enough for what the ceiling could be. And what's really important with wide receivers is finding guys who can actually drastically outperform their salary. Devontae Adams probably will have we don't use this word a lot. Jim hates this word, but a high floor because of volume.
I don't have the floor does not ignore the floor banner ready yet, so you caught me off guard here.
Devontae's got to put up like 23 at 8,500 to be like, man, we really had to have him. I don't know if the math's right there, but you guys get what I mean. But for A.J. Brown, like he can get 18, 19, at 7,100, and that's such a big overperformance there. Love A.J. Brown. Love Devontae Smith, who's actually going to have someone to take some attention away from him. Amon-Ra St. Brown. I was an early adopter. We both were last year. You gotta like that.
I might not have been.
You weren't. I didn't want to say that, but
I'm on him this year though. This week at least. Yeah.
Both tight ends, Dallas Goedert and T.J. Hawkinson, 5,700. Those are reasonable salaries. Not the worst tier to target. Some guys who can get some volume, and then I think you mentioned DJ Chark as well. But there are a lot of ways to stack this game, and I mean it's a great game to stack.
Yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown at $6,500. That's a low salary for a guy who might have the role. I know that last year when he was feasting, they didn't have Hawkinson. Swift was banged up, stuff like that. But I'd still expect him to be like $6,500 accounts for that. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Goddard 57, Hawkinson also 57. I think that hard to pass up there. Where does Hurts rank for you at quarterback at $8,000?
I don't have my rankings really finalized, but he might be number 2.
Okay.
Behind Mahomes.
That's fair. I think that makes sense. I can't really push back on that too much. I think that like this is just a good game in terms of salary. So whether or not I'm getting to even if it's not a Hurts lineup, I think having mini stacks here is very attractive. You touched on Chark. I do think he's worth expanding on very briefly. $5,300. We again want high A wide receivers in games where we expect their offense to be efficient. And who could be more efficient than Jared Goff? Nobody. So Chark at 53 at home in a dome, slight underdogs. I think this all adds up pretty well for Chark. He is not a high exposure play. Do not do that. But in terms of game stacks, run backs with Hurts, if I'm not going with St. Brown, Goddard, Hawkinson or Swift, I want Chark in that mix at least. So I think that's where I settle in on him. It's just being an option and a guy. I want to get to a 53 within these game stacks. Any Miles Sanders for you, or are we avoiding that?
I thought about it. I mean, he's a huge touchdown regression candidate, which is the case.
Or not to be one when you don't score any rushing touchdowns.
But it's, sometimes it's not as simple as saying this guy has to score more frequently. Like, I don't think so.
If he were lower salary than $6,500, like if he were in the CEH range at 58, I might be in. But again, I want to put a massive emphasis here on catching passes, and I don't expect him to be a huge contributor there, especially with AJ Brown in town now. Like that's one less route for him getting targets. So I'm probably not going to get there. I might be a little bit lower on Swift than you are at 76. Whoa. It's just because I like other guys. I love Aaron Jones. I love Saquon Barkley. It's not an anti-Swift thing because he had a very good role before he got, like, if you look back to last year before his injury, let me pull things up here. Before his injury, 13.7 carries, 6.7 targets per game, 98.1 total yards per game. That's really good. That's a really good role. So nothing against him. Just I think that I like other guys a little tiny baby bit more, but he does fit the kind I want with a lot of pass catching chops there. Again, no Jared Goff. Let's move now into the trend section for week number 1. Again, largely overall process based this week, but you did a full piece up on numberFire, a very good piece that I enjoyed reading as it progressed about pivoting from the chalk in tournaments. And I think it's a very worthwhile discussion here. So what'd you find when you dug into the data about pivoting off the chalk in tournaments?
Yes, that piece is called Daily Fantasy Football. Should we always pivot from popular plays in tournaments? You can just Google it. It's an easy way to find it. But basically, I wanted to answer the question that we talk about a lot. Everyone talks about whenever they're talking about, daily fantasy football, breaking down a slate is, should we pivot from the chalk, particular chalk plays? And that's never really going to be like a binary answer. It's just not. But I also wanted to see what happens historically. And honestly, it was really thought-provoking to define what a pivot might be. What's the chalk? Is it just the most popular play? Is it guys who hit a certain threshold? Are pivots who are also chalky themselves pivots technically? But you can read that whole thing up on numberFire. But I want to at least give the takeaways here because this is going to drive a lot of my process for this year. since 2017 is as far back as I looked for these numbers. But at quarterback, quarterbacks don't really get too popular. A 15% roster rate is what I consider chalky. Very few guys, I think 23 passers total actually surpassed the 20% roster rate in the Sunday Million. That's very, very low. People like to differentiate at quarterback, makes it very easy for us to play what we deem the best process plays, and that's why I try not to overthink it at quarterback. That said, we collectively are good at identifying quarterback success. Chalky stud quarterbacks had an eruption game, so at least 25 points half the time, despite a roster rate of sub 20%. It's a massive gap there. So guys that we're talking about a lot, Kyler, Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Herbert.
Kyler won't be popular.
But we don't have to worry about popularity so much at quarterback because the process, the way you score points is based on volume. Quarterbacks have the most bankable volume. So for me, not really going to care too much about roster rate ever at quarterback. For running back, we're also really good overall at identifying good chalk because, again, it's more process-driven, volume-driven than the pass-catching positions. But stud chalk is great, and we should really be open to pivoting to non-chalky studs, maybe Derrick Henry this week. Even though, Henry, I never seem to get right in terms of his popularity, but
we did last year.
He's the name that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Non-chalky mid-tier plays, which for me ended up being 7,000 to 8,400. Guys like Swift, Jones for this week, who are often afterthoughts. So if we can find, if we find names there that people are overlooking, but also have good projections, are in the consideration set, but maybe are the third or fourth guy in that tier. Maybe people are low on James Conner. The process kind of likes those guys. Again, this is kind of hard to explain through a podcast, but that's what I'm trying to get just the takeaways. I really advise looking at at least the end of that piece. Really good graphic there to kind of identify the differences in terms of Sunday Million roster rate and things like eruption rate. At wide receiver, this is the place. This is one of the places really to pivot. Stud chalk is really good. We're typically good at finding stud chalk. So someone like Devontae Adams, if he's chalky, Justin Jefferson, if he's chalky, we know that the volume should be there for these guys. That's why Cooper Kupp, peak Michael Thomas, these guys are really interesting from a DFS standpoint on FanDuel, which is a half PPR site. But overall, wide receiver chalk across all salary tiers underperforms in terms of eruption rate versus Sunday Million roster rate. So for example, mid-tier chalky receivers, so between the 7,000 and 8,000 range, they are rostered on average at a 31% clip. Again, I'm looking only at super chalky plays here, so that's obvious, but they erupt to get to 18 points just 20% of the time. So that's a very easy way to differentiate, and the pivoting at wide receiver is honestly pretty easy to do this week, all weeks, honestly. We get really point chasey when it comes to receivers. When guys score points, their salaries go up. We continue to chase that. When guys underperform, their salaries tend to go down, and then we're like, this guy's not doing anything. We should probably be very open to buying low on those names. And then at tight end, you already mentioned this, but pivoting to studs who are just kind of forgotten about kind of seems like the key process point that I kind of came up with here in the research. And also, whenever we get a value tight end, they kind of hit at a baseline rate, but don't necessarily hit a ceiling very often. And you really have to think through what a $5,100 tight end who might have a ceiling of 11 points does for you. If you were not
using 51 intentionally to subtweet Irv Smith, how rude.
No, because we're not really talking about 4,500 range. But if you're rostering those,
like Brevin Jordan or Mo Alley Cox, just curious.
If you, let's say Mo Alley Cox, there's reasons to like him. He's kind of a streamer in season-long leagues. You play him, he gets a touchdown, 40 yards, maybe 11 FanDuel points or whatever. If you're not using that savings to roster specifically high upside plays, and you're trying to balance things out more, that's really not a very good tournament build. It's more of a cash game build, and those are very different.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I found. Again, it's hard to explain this, but overall, I don't really. I mean, I kind of don't care about popularity at quarterback. Care about it very little at running back, and I'm going to get a little bit degaffy when it comes to receivers and tight ends this year. Just a heads up to anyone listening.
So I think that basically part of what you were saying with the tight ends was when you're using a value tight end, you're betting against the stud tight ends on the slate because their upside is so good. Is that the correct way to interpret that?
Yeah. So this week, you want to play Irv Smith in a lineup. You're going to like what it does.
Well,
Sorry.
if I use Irv Smith, I'm betting on a stud tight end by using Irv Smith.
Okay. Mo Alley Cox said he's what, 4,800?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's say you want to build around, or you're building a lineup and you have 4,800 left for a tight end and you plug them in. You're going to feel really good, but you're saying that Travis Kelce's not getting to, 18, 20. Mark Andrews isn't going to put up 18 or 20. Darren Waller, maybe not like 16 to 18. You're going to say these guys all sort of tank. It's not as simple as that, but when it does happen, it's
pretty close to being as simple as that, honestly. Like, I think that's pretty fair.
It is very hard to overcome that.
The value tight ends are most viable when Kelsey's on an island game or Mark Andrews is on a bye week. That's when you should be more enticed by the lower salary guys. One thing that I found based on going through stuff from last year was that I want to actively try to be spending up a tight end more this year than I have in the past. And being more accepting of mid-range running backs, lower salaried running backs, we tend to be pretty good at finding those as long as they have a path to a ceiling. So I'd agree with that as well. I think that is the fact that it's backed up by your research makes me feel better about that as well. Let's move into my first trend, talk about perfect lineups, because I did want to go through some more holistic stuff here, discuss process. I'm going to run through some key takeaways from perfect lineups on FanDuel last year and see what circumstances bred upside. The biggest thing to emphasize is pass catching at running back. 44 running backs made a perfect lineup on FanDuel last year. Only 10 of them, 10 out of 44, had 0 or 1 catches. That's compared to 13 running backs who had 6 or more receptions. There were more backs who had 6 or more receptions than those who had 0 or 1. 29.5%, almost 30% had 6+ receptions. That's absurd. On average, players in perfect lineups had 135 yards from scrimmage. If you can get there from rushing alone, like Derrick Henry, like Nick Chubb sometimes can, awesome, sick, good play. It's just a lot easier to get there when you have 2 routes to getting 235 or so yards. If I am using a rush-only running back, I want a path of 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry can get you there. He can. Jonathan Taylor can get you there. He definitely can. But the pool of guys is smaller, and I want to be clear about that. Second thing, quarterbacks that are slight underdogs, like Kyler, should be a slight underdog, blow up a lot. Last year, 6 out of 18 quarterbacks in perfect lineups were underdogs of less than 5 points. That is 33%. And on the whole, that's compared to 25% of all quarterbacks were slight dogs. So actually more than the consensus there. But only 10% of popular quarterbacks on FanDuel in the Sunday Million were underdogs at all spreads. That being the top 3 in roster rate each week. So if you see a quarterback who is a slight underdog, they're unlikely to be popular and they have a path to a very big game. I think that is super actionable. Finally, games with low totals are hideous, especially a wide receiver. Last year, 49.3% of all games had a total of 45.5 or lower. That 49.3% produced just 33.9% of receivers in perfect lineups. So 66% of receivers came from games with an above average total. Those receivers in super low total games were also very unlikely to produce when they were popular. So it ties into what Brandon said. You should pivot at wide receiver, and that's especially true if it is a wide receiver in a game with a low total. So again, the takeaways here from me were prioritize pass catching at running back despite FanDuel being a half PPR site. Try to find quarterbacks who may be slightly under-rostered because they are slight underdogs, aka Kyler, and pivot at wide receiver if the total is low and you need to have a really good situation for a receiver in a low total game to be a good play for DFS. Brandon, any pushback from you on that? Any final takeaways? Any thoughts on that?
No, I think it all makes a ton of sense too, anecdotally. And one thing that just jumps out more and more as we talk, and it just gets solidified in the process, is looking at receiving for running backs. Even though it's not a full PPR site, it matters, and we'll touch on that in my next trend as well.
All right, well, let's move on exactly to that trend and talk about the running backs, the stud running backs on this slate, because we got to decide. We can't use everyone, which is a bummer. But we're going to break down their workload. So when you dug into that, what'd you see with those stud backs?
Yeah, I mean, for me, we have 4 studs on the slate just in terms of salary to keep it simple. With Austin Eckler at 94, Christian McCaffrey 95, Derrick Henry 97, Jonathan Taylor 10-2. Of course, some like Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook also studs, but for the sake of keeping this a little bit more brief, I wanted to talk about their workloads, why it matters, and why we shouldn't just be chasing value at running back, because it's very tempting to do in week 1 whenever guys are undersalaried for the roles that they're actually expected to have for week 1. But Jonathan Taylor, again, a salary of $10,200 this week. The Colts are 7.5-point road favorites against the Texans. His props on FanDuel Sportsbook are pretty wild. Over 99.5 rushing yards is minus 114. He is minus 240 to score, which is about 71% likely. It's weird to think, but he actually didn't. He started slow last year in terms of his role. He didn't break a 60% snap rate until week 6. After that, he averaged 21 carries, 22 carries if I round up, 5.3 red zone carries, which was 87% of the team's red zone carries. His red zone workload was historical. I also wrote an article specifically on him in the offseason. Just honestly, like nearly unmatched red zone workload last year. 2.9 targets per game, which is definitely not bad. Over 137 yards per game and 27.4 adjusted opportunities per game. What is that? That is your carries plus double your targets. It's a stat that Jim coined, a phrase that Jim coined. You coined that?
Can we reword it? I can't say the word adjusted.
I don't think we ever found a solution, did we?
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Weighted
adjusted opportunities.
I don't know. But
we'll figure it out.
Opportunities is carries plus targets. We can call them MVPs if we want.
Poor MVS didn't last very long.
While we're in this game, a name like Dameon Pierce is rising up the redraft board. He went, I think, in round 4 of a home league I had last night. It's wild, but he's plus 135 to score, which is about 43%. He has a rushing prop of 48.5 yards. I know that there's an astronomical difference in their salary, but that's a kind of production gap we're looking at whenever you take savings and at running back compared to these studs. Derrick Henry, I am really drawn into more and more, especially if I find out that he's not going to be popular or prohibitively popular this week. And again, I don't really care too much about popularity at running back. Before his injury, he played 8 games, 27.4 carries per game, 117 rushing yards per game, massive red zone share, 2.5 targets per game, which is good for him. That's 32.4 adjusted opportunities. He's minus 170 to score. He's actually plus 350 to score twice, which is 22%, which is kind of high. You gotta love to see that. Christian McCaffrey, though, is the name I get to, and I say, all right, the total is 41.5. You don't love that, but 1.5 point home favorite. You kind of do want, there's kind of a misnomer that you want your running backs to be super big favorites. A more beneficial game script can be a tighter game script for running backs, and that's what we get here, despite the low total. And despite that low total, he's minus 130 to score because of his market shares. That's still pretty good, but he also can pay off without scoring because his workload, phenomenal. In 4 games last year when he actually played half the snaps, 33.5 adjusted opportunities per game, 60% of the red zone rushing share, 25% of the red zone target share, over 150 yards per game, scrimmage yards. And then Austin Eckler, again, the 4th stud here, good game, 9,400, very, very loved by the fantasy football community. I'm a little bit lower on Eckler. He averaged about a 65% snap rate last year. And in games where he had at least half the snaps, 13 carries, but 6.1 targets per game for 25 adjusted opportunities per game, almost 100 scrimmage yards per game in those. Of note, a big overperformer in the touchdown column that led to about 19.9 FanDuel points per game, but expected based on my model about 16. So now that's a lot to keep straight. But here's the thing. Adjusted opportunities matter. Workload matters for running backs. The R squared last year in terms of per game adjusted opportunities and FanDuel points, that R squared 0.91. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, it's if you know adjusted opportunities, you have a lot about FanDuel points. And actually, in terms of expected FanDuel points, it's 0.98, which is just basically complete overlap there. But if you look at those splits that are relevant, I know we're cherry picking here these splits for these guys, but here's why this matters. If you look at the full season and then apply those splits I just laid out, Christian McCaffrey would lead at 33.5. Derrick Henry would be at 32.4. Najee Harris, 29.1. Didn't do a whole lot with it. I know he had a ton of targets. He's also got a foot injury. Keep that in mind for this week. Alvin Kamara, though, 28.8. I really like Kamara. I'm kind of warming up to him. Jonathan Taylor, though, 27.4. Dalvin Cook, 26.7. And then Austin Eckler at a 25.3. So Eckler's still top 7, but I don't necessarily think that he's should be at 9,400.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is we know that these opportunities matter, but it drops off so quickly to the other guys. Those are the only guys above 25. Drops off there. Only a handful of guys are even above like 22. These are the studs. We know where fantasy points are coming from. We really have to think long and hard about running back each and every week. So for my question to you is, how are you handling the top 4? And is anyone particularly out of that tier? And is anyone particularly close who's not in that tier?
So out is Eckler. Ranking them CMC 1, Henry 2. Henry versus Taylor is pretty tough, but I will go Henry there. I like both a lot. But to me, it comes down to yards because yards correlate to touchdowns pretty well. So I feel okay using that as a proxy. But McCaffrey, and I went with 5 games with a 40% snap share, 142 yards. Henry, before his injury, 136.4. Taylor last year, 127.7. Eckler, 98.4. Big drop off there. So I'm just going to rank them based on that. Taylor's red zone share was stupid, 52%. Henry was 48%. McCaffrey, 47%. So touchdowns would favor those guys, but I just want McCaffrey. So McCaffrey 1, Henry 2, JT 3, all those guys very worthy of salaries. The guy who I would shove into that range is a guy you mentioned just once, very briefly in there. You're nodding your head. Dalvin?
Yeah.
Dalv? Yeah.
Yeah, good game.
I agree. Yeah, it's a good game. Last year, in his full games, 124.4 yards per game. That is just below Jonathan Taylor. Red zone share, 42.5%. You could say, hey, they're going to run the ball less, but the goal is to get targets. So that's a good thing for us. So I actually think this is a positive shift for Dalvin Cook. I think that if I'm looking for an under-rostered stud, kind of think Dal's that guy at 84. I will say that McCaffrey will not be as popular as he should. I'm going to try to jam him in as often as I can. But I think that if I'm looking for like a pivot, I would say Dalvin Cook is that guy.
Yeah, I mentioned Kamara. I'm warming up to him. I don't know if this is the week for it specifically because the game itself is not overly appealing, but Dalvin Cook, I would say, is the name below that tier that jumps out. And I'm also lowest on Eckler and highest on McCaffrey. This is the healthiest we're going to get Christian McCaffrey all season. And Christian McCaffrey, when healthy, is the number 1 player in fantasy football.
Unparalleled. That's what he is. Okay, let's stick with the Dalvin Cook discussion and talk about that Vikings-Packers game from my second trend. That's pace. The one game with super high projected offensive efficiency we did not touch on in the Bookmaker section was Packers at Vikings. And that's, for me at least, largely due to pace. Pace is simply how fast the game is. Fast games contain more plays. That means more chances for touchdowns, more chances for fantasy points. This one will likely be pretty slow. Now, the Vikings, for their part, may be faster this year because Kevin O'Connell's the head coach versus Mike Zimmer. He should throw the ball more, and more passing typically or does mean a faster pace because incompletions stop the clock, completions move the ball in an efficient manner, so they may be fine. But the Packers ranked 31st in situation neutral pace last year, according to Football Outsiders. Now, no Devontae Adams, potentially no Alan Lazard. They'll probably be more run heavy than they were, and that'll drag down the pace even a bit more. So I like a lot of individual plays here. Dalvin Cook is awesome. Aaron Jones, awesome. I want to get to Justin Jefferson. Irv Smith is a value tight end. But that pace question lingering in my head, and it kind of bums me out, Brandon. I'm not going to lie. It hurts me to my core. So is this a game you will stack? Where does it rank on your list? What's your view of this game overall?
Yeah, I mean, this game is definitely fourth, or at least fourth. I honestly have not looked too much at the other games.
Let me just pull up my
four.
projected offensive efficiency quick to present you with a potential fourth. So we have Cardinals, Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, Eagles, Lions, all definitively above it. I agree with you there. Next up in projected offensive efficiency on the main slate for me is Miami and New England.
I thought so.
So Packers, Vikings, firm fourth, correct?
Yeah.
But it's in its own tier. I would say below the top three and above the others.
Yeah, for sure. We run into the issues for Green Bay with pace. As much as I know how good Aaron Rodgers is as a quarterback, I don't like to play quarterbacks if I don't feel confident in a stack. I don't like to guess wrong. I don't know what the market shares are going to look like. And frankly, I don't have to guess. I'm not going to play Kirk Cousins. So it's sort of maybe a mini stack sort of thing. But
yeah,
I am very open to one-offs of Dalvin Cook, and I would be open to Justin Jefferson. I just realistically don't think I'm going to spend up at receiver this week because of all of the stud running backs I have to pick from.
I think the one advantage Jefferson has is that of the games I want to stack, like Devontae is kind of the only high salaried receiver there. You could kind of count Keenan Allen if you wanted to, but I'm not super keen on Keenan. Sorry. So like if I were to use a one-off high salary receiver, it would be Jefferson. I think that he's a really fun play this week. $8,100. He actually is in my player picks. I'd like to get there, but like, let's say I have an Eagles Lions stack where I have a lot of salary to spend. Kind of want to make sure I get some Jefferson in those situations because he's insane and he could get a really good workload this year. They should throw the ball more. But I agree with you. No quarterbacks in this game for me. I'd like to avoid the Packers receivers if I can, even though there will be volume available. I think it's mostly Jones, Dalvin, Irv, and Jefferson for me within this game. Let's take a look at the weather for this week. Weather does matter. I know people get mad about it on Twitter, like, oh, herp, you're overthinking weather. Well, people don't think about it enough based on roster rates and high win games and based on what happens perfect lineups. You see a lot fewer eruptions in games with high wind. Speaking of wind, let's talk about that Dolphins versus Patriots game. Smidge high there, 11 miles per hour winds, 11 mile per hour winds. Say that better. Also 91 and humid, which will not be fun for the players down there. I think that game is not super attractive to begin with, but would downgrade it a smidge due to wind there. Slight chance of rain in Chicago for the Bears and the 49ers. They should be okay. Winds are reasonable at 8 miles per hour, but check back on that one later. Rain odds increase as the game goes along for the Panthers and the Browns. Highest chances of rain are at the end, so check back on the timeline of that. I don't really care too much about rain unless it's a monsoon, unless it comes with a high wind, so we should be okay across the board there. Let's dive in now to our positional plays for this week on FanDuel. Brandon, starting off with you at quarterback, who are you eyeing there this week?
Patrick Mahomes. It's very obvious, but I also don't know if it's so obvious that at the salary of $8,700, he's going to be, again, we don't get quarterbacks who are prohibitively popular very often. I don't think that's going to happen for Mahomes at that salary. He's going to lose Tyreek, and I think that'll bump down sentiment as well. But the salary for Mahomes specifically, very easy to offset with his pass catchers, aside from Kelsey, but you could also potentially go with a double stack or go Mahomes, CEH, and Kelsey, kind of balance things out there, get access to, I'm not saying every yard in that offense, but a good majority of them. So point being, you can offset that salary pretty easily with stacks. Implied team total of 29.5 in the game of the week, set as a moderate road favorite. I think it should be back and forth enough where they're not really scaling things back. Arizona did rank 30th in downfield yards per target allowed last year. So when passes did go downfield against them, they weren't particularly good at that. Pretty volatile stat, but still. And I think there should be some deep shots in this offense. Even without Tyreek Hill, maybe teams bracket them a little bit less. And, they got an MVP caliber wide receiver replacement who can do some work downfield. Second love, Jalen Hurts, 8,000. Really checks the boxes of playing in a game with a high total, is a rushing quarterback, good game environment, playing in a dome. Pretty peak checklist for a lot of upside. But he's basically Jalen Hurts and was given A.J. Brown, which is like kind of wild to think about. He's still got Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. So he's got pass catchers who can do things. And of course, one of the things that separates quarterbacks, one of the really only things that separates quarterbacks, like I guess their efficiency or whatever, but the real differentiator in fantasy football is rushing. And if you can rush the ball as a quarterback, it's pretty phenomenal. 9.3 carries per game, over 50 yards a game. And he's got, frankly, a receiver in A.J. Brown who could handle 12 plus targets if they throw enough for that, but also take 5 targets for 90 yards and a touchdown too, because he's just phenomenal. So I think Jalen Hurts, great play. Might be a little bit popular, but again, don't care about that at all this week.
So we said there are 4 quarterbacks you like this week. You talked about 2. I'll talk about the other 2 right now, and Justin Herbert and Kyler Murray. Herbert, I mean, he's facing Vegas. They're projected to rank 27th in passing efficiency by my numbers this year. Chargers rank 2nd in projected passing offense. So actually, if I look at like just overall projected offensive efficiency this week for a standalone team, Chargers are number 1. So I'm going to go Herbert as a guy I like a lot for this week. He runs a bit, not as much as you'd like, but high total, tight spread. Herbert checks every box for me, as does Kyler Murray. Again, he's an underdog, which means the roster rate here should be low. I do like the Chiefs defense, but don't love it. It's a fast-paced game. Kyler is healthy. He is missing DeAndre Hopkins, but he struggled in part with touchdown variance after Hopkins left last year. I think that you give him an offseason to plan for an absence here. You add in Marquise Brown to replace Christian Kirk. I think this adds up pretty well. So Murray, I understand the negative sentiment around this team, but I want to get to Kyler Murray as a guy I love for this week. Let's go to running back. Who do you like there?
Yeah, both of our number ones are Christian McCaffrey. I feel good with that. I want to make sure that I get some exposure to Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry. I'm probably fine missing out on Eckler. I hope I don't regret saying that, but I think his workload is not as good as the other guys, and he just overperformed in the touchdown column drastically. I already talked about Christian McCaffrey's workload in that healthy sample, but it's not really an overstatement to say that when Christian McCaffrey's healthy, he is the best fantasy football asset that there is, and he's always played in bad offenses, so I'm not really concerned about the low total here. I think I looked at this last year, actually, when he was actually healthy, and didn't really show a whole lot of splits whenever the total was high or low. Could be misremembering that, but it's Christian McCaffrey.
No, I remember that too. You're right.
Best workload in football, 9,500. We could be looking at this as too low. Maybe he could be 10K in a few weeks if he, has the role that we think he does.
He could be 11K next week after you're ups for 40 FanDuel points this week.
It's true.
I'd still pay it, though.
Second love was maybe going to be, I was maybe going to pivot this to Dalvin Cook, but I'm going to stick with DeAndre Swift at 76. I love that salary, love this game. Implied team total is still 22.5. In games last year where he played at least half the snaps, 12 of them, 24.8 adjusted opportunities per game, 6.3 targets per game, about 90 yards a game from scrimmage. And last year, it was basically DeAndre Swift in terms of targets per game at running back, aside from Najee Harris, whenever he got boosted by that like 19 or 20 target game he had. It was basic, but like Swift was the guy in terms of targets. That adds up. The average running back target is worth twice as many FanDuel points as the average running back carry. This stuff matters. Philly wasn't the greatest overall defense, kind of middling, not that concerned. He had at least 5 targets in 10 different games last season. I love that. And my third love, Saquon Barkley. 6,800. I think that's a bit too low. Last year in 10 games where he played at least half the snaps, 24 adjusted opportunities per game, just shy of 80 scrimmage yards per game, but is projectable for receiving volume. 4.4 targets per game last year, had at least 4 in 7 different games. And I think that he could stack, like running back stacks are not very popular, but I think this is one that could work out with Derrick Henry.
They're decently common in perfect lineups, though, just because, You need guys who can bust off long runs, and not many people do that more often than Derrick Henry. So I think that a running back stack works pretty well. So I had both McCaffrey and Saquon in mine as well. McCaffrey, everything you mentioned is why I like him. As far as Saquon goes, I actually looked at a different split. I looked at the 3 games he played before his ankle injury when he was getting like an 80% snap rate, because it sounds like he might be there again this year. In those 3 games, 14 carries, 5.3 targets per game, 96.3 yards per game, which is basically Eckler's workload, with 50% of the red zone work, getting that for $6,800. I bet the Giants when they were plus 6.5. I think they're pretty lively within this game. I think that Barkley makes a lot of sense, and I am okay stacking him with Henry, like you said. I'm also okay with Tony as a Henry stack. I'm not going to any of the receivers on the Tennessee side, so if I were to use Saquon, it'd probably be with Henry or as a standalone play, but I'm fine with that. Other guy my loves is Aaron Jones. It is a slog of a game. That stinks, but I love the potential role here because I think they're going to use him in really fun ways as a pass catcher. Last year, again, in week 8 with no Devontae, 15 carries, 11 targets, 110 yards in scrimmage. He'll probably lose goal line work to AJ Dillon, but the pass catching upside here is stupid. So for $7,400, I adore him, and I want to get there for sure. I do think that Dalvin, like you said, is kind of a worthwhile shout too, but Aaron Jones, just really fun play. If you want some like low salary backs, I am at least considering. I mentioned Travis Etienne. He's probably one of the primary ones. Clyde Edwards-Helaire being the other one at 58.
I was actually going to ask whenever we were talking about CEH, after we talked about ETN, I was going to give you the ETN or CEH.
Well, CEH just inherently because I'm stacking that game. So it's not like I prefer his role. I think just because I'll be stacking that game.
If you're building
ETN's role is probably going to be better.
Yeah, I would say that for sure.
Okay.
But so if you're building maybe a single entry, you're going to CEH?
Probably. Just because I'm more likely to stack that game.
Yeah.
And like with my approach to single entry is I just have like 3 games that I stack within that to fill out a majority of the lineup. Like I've got one right now that is a Chiefs stack, Chiefs Cardinals stack. It is a Chargers Raiders stack, and then a one-off play in a game that I want to stack in the Eagles. So, I think I'll wind up being higher in CH, but ETN is up there for me. I don't think I'll go below CH. Like you mentioned, Dameon Pierce. I think he's going to lose passing game work to Rex Burkhead, and they are. I bet them as well plus 8.5. It's now 7.5. I think that they're like going to be interesting, but I can't get to Pierce at 54. Any other thoughts on value backs for you?
I understand the appeal, but if I'm playing a value back, I am really, really trying to get, or multiple, I'm really trying to get access to receivers who I think have unmatched upside. I'm not discounting Devontae Adams in week 1, especially in this game. I know Justin Jefferson can go off. Tyreek Hill is a name that we didn't really discuss, but he went from like dominating the Patriots to getting kind of limited. So I think that might transfer over a little bit just because I give Bill Belichick credit for stuff like that. I don't know if it's the right play to load up on value backs, and I think you named the ones that are most appealing.
I agree. Okay, wide receiver, what is getting your attention there?
So I'm actually not going above 7,000 for any of my loves, not because I don't like any of those names, but if I'm building around a high salary quarterback, Christian McCaffrey, DeAndre Swift, or like Dalvin Cook, it's really hard to make a core play out of someone up in that salary range. But I'm going to start with Marquise Brown with a very nice salary of $6,900. Checks the box as a high ADOT receiver, playing at home. That's a gym combo that you typically love. High scoring game, critical marks for predictable wide receiver upside. It's really not a long list. A lot of home teams are underdogs, it feels like. Not necessarily something I factor in too heavily in my process, but I did notice that. Should get extended volume early in the season with how this team's shaken out, with obviously no DeAndre Hopkins, but Zach Ertz not 100% even if he does go. And I think that he's the kind of player, I know he's the kind of player who can actually outperform that salary to the point that he smashes through value. So I love that for this week. I also love Devontae Smith for similar reasons. He's someone who could surpass value heavily because his salary is so low at $6,100 and because of the type of player he is with a high ADOT. I mean, wouldn't be surprised if he's top 5 in air yards, even on maybe like 7-ish targets. Love this game indoors. Lions were last in yards per target allowed on downfield attempts. They're 31st in pressure rate last year as well. I know things change, but Pro Football Focus ranked their D-line 26th and their secondary 25th. So this is a very good matchup to exploit. And my third love is going to be Christian Kirk at 5,800. I know that we're breaking away from the high total narrative, but it's not like low total games never produce any sort of wide receiver upside. It's just less likely. But with Kirk here, he should be featured. He had a 40% route per target per route rate, however, whatever it would be. Don't make me do math. But that was 5th highest among all players with at least 20 routes in the preseason. Highest among anyone who's relevant, unless you count Isaiah Likely.
Whoa.
He should be the wide receiver
one. Isaiah Likely? How dare you? $4,100, baby.
He should be the wide receiver 1. I think he's undersalaried for that role. And so I can take the game environment for the salary here. I think he's a good play.
Yeah, I think that he's at least interesting. I'm not sure if I'll get there, but I get why you're there. I think your process is sound. I'm just not sure if I'll get there myself. My first love at receiver is Justin Jefferson. I want to try to get here in the games where I save at running back, like by using someone like CEH. Because last year in games with Adam Thielen healthy, Jefferson had 40% of the deep targets, 28% in the red zone. This team should be more pass heavy this year. It's a very good secondary in Green Bay. Very good secondary. And that does matter, but it's Justin Jefferson, man. I'm going to be going there when I can because he is very fun this year. My second love is Mike Williams at $6,600. It's a fun game to stack. If you look at the full games with Keenan Allen last year, Williams had 20% of the overall targets, 40% deep, and 23% in the red zone. The Raiders defense, not one I'm fearing as of right now. I do like Amon-Ra St. Brown in this range. Juju Smith-Schuster. DJ Moore in one of the lower total games at 64. I think he could be interesting, especially if he's not going to get on any radars. And suppress the vomit in your mouth by Adam Thielen at 61. That's a little low. Little low for a guy with his role. I'll say that, little low. I will probably use him and probably regret it. But here we go. My third love is Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He could get a low target share because Travis Kelce is going to get a lot of work. However, we did see MVS, MVP, earn some targets with the Packers last year. Most of those were downfield. He earned a target on 30% of his routes in the preseason. He is a downfield threat. He is a high A-dot wide receiver in a spot where you expect his team to be efficient. I love him. Also in this range, Brandon Ayuk at 56. I'm in on. Kadarius Toney, again, not on the injury report on Wednesday. Slamming Sammy Watkins, maybe Randall Cobb. But I think to me, it is MVS 1, Ayuk 2, Toney 3 is the primary guys to go to in this low to mid 5,000 range. Tight end, who stands out to you there?
Obviously the 3 studs, but in building around the guys who I've already mentioned that I love, I need to go a little bit lower. And a stud who's kind of a lower salaried stud and maybe a little bit overlooked because of the game environment. Kyle Pitts. Drake London's hurt. Kyle Pitts, look, he could pay off without a touchdown with the volume he can get. He can get downfield work. In 12 games without Calvin Ridley last year, 29% air yard share, 10.5 yard ADOT. Red zone work can really only go up. He's got to score more touchdowns this year than he did last year. I think that he can overperform that salary pretty easily. And I also love TJ Hawkinson at 5,700. It's a loaded slate at tight end. I mentioned the fears of punting too much at tight end. I don't think that this qualifies as a punt. Hawkinson has some juice. He's going to play a lot of snaps, run a lot of routes. Had 7 targets per game last year, 25% air yard share, 4th best among all tight ends, despite a pretty modest ADOT of 7.5 yards, tight end average being 7. So I think that this makes a lot of sense, fits a lot of game stacks, but also is a middle ground between punting and, trying to allocate, $8,000 for Kelce or Mark Andrews.
Yeah. And I think that having your tight ends be part of a game stack is something you should look to do. I think it was 48% of tight ends in perfect lineups last year were part of either a single team stack or a game stack. So that you want them involved with other players in your team in some way. So that's why Hawkinson makes a lot of sense in that perspective. That's also why I'm on Darren Waller and Irv Smith as my 2 loves this week. Waller, people are probably going to avoid him because of the quote unquote injury with Devontae being in town too, but $7,000 in an elite scoring environment. Last year, again, with no Adams, so major caveat there, but a 24% target share, 23% of the deep work, and 28% in the red zone. That's awesome workload. It will go down this year with Devontae there, but I think that a Waller, Mike Williams stack, something that I want to be on pretty heavily. Irv Smith, it's kind of a projection / hope based thing, because even back in 2020, when Kyle Rudolph missed time, Irv Smith's target share was still just 14%, but he had 25% of the deep work and 29% in the red zone. That was with Jefferson. That was with Thielen. That's not bad. A more pass-heavy offense now. It's a pretty narrow target tree. It is a projection-based thing with Irv, not like an actual like numbers-based projection, but like you're assuming an assumption-based play. But I think that's viable. I don't mind Molly Cox and Brevin Jordan in that same game at 48, but I do like Irv Smith at 51. Hopefully he comes through. We'll see how that one goes, though. Let's finish up here with your favorite segment, Brandon. Defense. Who are you looking towards there?
Love talking defense. My favorite thing. So I got in to the industry. I love Washington this week. I like the Jaguars offense kind of overall this season, but this one seems like a mismatch, Jim. Washington at home. They have Pro Football Focus.
Is this Virginia, Brandon? Like 5-year-old Brandon we're hearing here?
No, I was doing like the defense guy bit, like not the defense, like people who like defense or like
you gotta dip in,
playing a role.
Yeah,
like,
you gotta dip in.
This is my time to shine. That's
exactly
what I was going for.
I got you.
But yeah, Washington second ranked defensive line by Pro Football Focus. Jacksonville's offensive line is 26th. Love to see that kind of mismatch there. I'll probably say this numerous times throughout the season, but more than 60% of fantasy points for defenses come from just sacks and turnovers. Don't look at things really like points allowed. Don't really try to project like touchdowns. Sacks, turnovers, bankable. That's why we'll generally target defenses in higher scoring games. This isn't one of them, but I think Washington's a good play.
One game that does have a bit of a higher total is the Dolphins and the Patriots. I think both sides of that game are at least interesting in terms of defense. I did go with the Dolphins here because they are home favorites. I bet the Patriots plus 3.5. So clearly I don't buy into the 3.5 point spread there, but the Dolphins, they can generate a pass rush. The Patriots offensive line had a lot of changeover this year during the offseason. Obviously the personnel on offense, the coaching staff had a lot of change too. So the Dolphins, I would say, are outside of the Commanders, the lowest salary team I want to use. But I'm okay looking at the Commanders, the Jags, the Chiefs, the Browns, the Bengals. I know the Chiefs are part of a game that I love, but if I'm not using Kyler, I'm okay using the Chiefs at times as well. So defense is tough this week for sure, given the number of teams we do like. That's all we got here for week number 1 in our preview podcast. Brandon, any final thoughts for the good people before we send them off to fill out their lineups on FanDuel for this week?
Week 1's always hard because we got to talk extra about trying to project workloads, anticipate certain things, talk process. Frankly, this week or this year at least, talk a lot about injuries. So it was a long one, but I think it was it's important to really think about week 1. Think about these teams. I know you mentioned, and this is not to undercut like the Irv Smith thing, but don't just play guys you're assuming are going to be in big roles. Like really think about the odds that maybe you have it wrong. There probably are other options to pivot to. That might be the smarter play. Of course, it pays to be ahead of the curve, but very often you'll be guessing wrong, and talent alone doesn't really drive usage. It's coaching and opportunity.
Yeah, and I value assumptions. Just like you said the word probability. I think you said the word probability. Think about the probability that assumption is true. Like the probability that Irv Smith has a 17% target share on this Vikings team, 30%, somewhere around there. So, keep that in mind. Whereas Darren Waller, probably more likely to have a bigger role, stuff like that. So don't chase value just for value's sake. Make sure you're getting raw points in there. Think long and hard about game stacks. Think hard about pivoting, like Brandon said, at wide receiver and tight end, and weigh that into your decision-making process as you build your lineups. We'll be back with you on Monday for our recap podcast. That'll be live on the FanDuel YouTube page, 10 a.m. Eastern, and then up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that. So go subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our MLB DFS podcast, PGA, NASCAR, UFC, everything else, all in the same feed. And also check out our betting podcast on the Covering the Spread podcast feed as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. Thank you all for tuning in. Good luck to you with your NFL DFS lineups. Enjoy the opening games tonight. Enjoy Sunday. We'll talk to you once again on Monday to wrap up what should be a fun weekend of some football. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.